Now last month I forgot to do an introduction, so this month I made sure we did it at the beginning. So welcome to our second online video. If you haven't met me before, my name is Sharon and I'm a florist, a teacher and trainer, and pretty much involved in anything to do with floral design, floristry or flower arranging. I'm a national teacher for the National Association of Flower Arrangers, and I'm also a floristry teacher. And at the moment I'm based in a unit which is in Binia in Llanelli. It was chosen because it was an excellent space to run workshops from, and unfortunately we went into lockdown with the COVID-19 pandemic and I've only been able to run 3 or 4 classes from here. So we're anticipating that in September we'll be back to normal and we'll be able to have visitors back here to do workshops from the unit. So this month we're making this wonderful hat box. You're going to get some step-by-step instructions and hopefully you're going to end up with something as beautiful as this. So see you all very soon. So in your packets you would have received one of these gorgeous little hat boxes. And when they come in to me, they come in a set of 3 just like this with the bow on the top. And then what happens then is once you've arranged inside the hat box, it's a little bit difficult to display the hat, making the best use out of that lovely bow that sits on the top. So what I've done for you is I've taken the bow off the lid and I've attached it to the front of the container so that it looks much more presentable and a much more attractive design to sit in the house, and much nicer for you to enjoy. Now inside the hat box you will find it comes ready prepared with this lovely plastic liner, and that fits nice and snugly into the box itself. And we'll talk through the floral foam so that you can get that prepared. Now the floral foam preparation is the same as it is each time you use the foam. When you receive it, it will be dry in a full block like this. And this month you've had 2 blocks and we need to soak it in a fairly large container. Doesn't have to be as big as this one here. It can be your sink or a bucket. Just rest it on the top and let it sink down under its own weight. So the water does need to be deep enough so that the floral foam can sink down properly. And you'll see just here I've got one that's already been done. So you can fit 2 in the container if you want, or you can do 1 at a time, it doesn't matter. And it takes just a minute and a half or so to fully absorb all the water. And while that prepares itself, you can pop off, pour yourself a nice little gin and tonic or a glass of wine, or make yourself a cup of tea, and we'll see you back in a couple of minutes. So you should now have 2 blocks of floral foam ready prepared, and to make it easier for you to see what I'm doing, I've just taken my little plastic container out of the cardboard box. Now that might also be a better way of you preparing the container, because obviously if you drip lots of water on the box, it's only made of cardboard and you will damage the box slightly as you're working. So to prepare the foam, let's just swap that round so you can see. I've cut the foam so it's the same width as my little plastic container, and the writing here is on the top. But we're going to place it in so we have it taller in the container. So we're not flat as this piece of floral foam is here, we're up on its side. So the writing is on the side, not on the top. And then an easy sort of tip is to just place the container on top and then get your knife. You can always cut it a little bit smaller if you cut it too large, and then just use a good sharp knife just to remove that little section of the foam. That then will sit quite nicely alongside the other piece. So we have 2 pieces of floral foam sitting upright alongside one another. and hopefully that will sit quite firmly into that cardboard box. Now, a good little tip, you might want to have a tea towel with you just to keep your hands nice and dry and to clear up the work surface as you're going along. If you feel it needs it, if you feel it's a little bit loose inside that container, then you can wedge a couple of little bits down the side there. So if you're a working florist, you would probably wedge in some little pieces in the side there so that it doesn't slip around when you're out delivering. But if it's just for yourself at home, that's not quite so important. There's plenty of surface area there for you to be able to arrange onto. And if you think about where the bow is, we've gone acrossways, not lengthways along the side there. And that's now quite heavy and quite secure. I'm just going to wipe down my turntable. Make sure that I don't get that box too wet while I'm working. And this week it's a front-facing design, so we're always going to be looking at it with the bow at the front. And we're going to talk through with you in just a minute all the lovely flowers that you've got, but you've got quite a nice large display of flowers. And quite often, if you look at pictures of hat boxes, you will see them sometimes with the lid placed at a little bit of a jaunty angle, sometimes they're on the top, sometimes they're just sitting on the side. But because we have quite a large quantity of flowers, I'm just going to use the lid placed there on the bottom like so. You can decide at the end if you want to sit it on the top to make the presentation of it a little bit different. And that's our container all nicely prepared. Now what I'm also going to suggest at this point in time is if you run a little bit of a line from front to back there on the floral foam, you'll notice then that we've got 4 sections, and it makes it a little bit easier for me when I'm giving you the instructions of roughly where we're placing the flowers. So our container's prepared. I'm just going to pop that to one side. I'm going to get rid of these 2 little bits of floral foam because I don't need these. I'll use them up in something later. You can get rid of them. They need to go in a black rubbish bin. They're not biodegradable, or you can keep them, and you can grow little cuttings in them, or you could make a little small arrangement maybe if there's any flowers left as well. So we'll pop those down to the side, just clear down a little bit, and we'll have a look at the exciting flowers that we've got this month. So we'll start looking at the bits of foliage that we've got to start with. The foliage tends to create the frame of the design, and you have 3 of these very lovely little Chico palms. These come all the way from Costa Rica, and it gives us a lovely little bit of texture. And I've tried this month to provide flowers and choose flowers that I know are going to cope very well with this sort of very muggy weather that we've got at the moment. And if you're very much into traditional sort of flower arranging, you might expect me to provide you with 4s to follow that pattern of the square box. But for me, it tends to make the box look a little bit sort of artificial in its presentation. So we've got odd numbers, which tend to be a little bit more pleasing to the eye. So we have 3 of those little Chico palms. Then we have a foliage that I think you probably might have had last month. This is the pistache. Again, this is chosen because it grows in quite warm environments and quite hot and clammy conditions. So that will last really well for you in this heat. And I've selected some of the favourite, one of foliage everybody loves to use, and that's the eucalyptus. And I say it every month, I say it in every workshop. You might have one large piece like this given to you, or you could have several little pieces. But it's the quantity that I'm looking for rather than the shape and the size of the stem. And you'll use these sort of offshoot sections of the branch there. So long or short, it'll be used up quite nicely. So that's the foliage varieties. Now, this month, as I said, I've tried to pick flowers that will cope in this heat. And one of the flowers that's possibly going to be the weakest of the flower choice that I've given you today is this lovely hydrangea. Big flower head, and I've left the plastic on because it helps to hold the moisture within the head and stops it drooping. But as the word says, hydrangea and hydrate, they're very thirsty flowers, so they like an awful lot of water. So if you've got them from the garden, if you're picking them to use from the garden, always have them in very deep water. They're thirsty, they drink a lot, so keep topping up the water on a regular basis. Now, one thing a lot of people don't realise about the hydrangea is this part here, this lovely white fluffy head, is actually a bract. So that's a modified leaf. And the flower, if we can pick it up on the camera, is this very small, insignificant sort of little dot there in the middle of the flower. In the middle of the head. That's actually the flower in this centre part here. So this part, this whole part, is actually a leaf. We call it a bract. And if you find that in a day or two's time the hydrangea isn't coping very well in the floral foam, then take it out and submerge the whole of the head in a clean sort of bucket or container of water. Right down as deep as you can go, and because it's a leaf, it will take up water through the head, and you'll be surprised how quickly that will perk back up again. So if you feel, you can normally feel, at the moment they're quite sort of firm to touch. You can sort of, a little bit like we are when we get a bit tired or we're a bit dehydrated ourselves, we sort of flag a little bit, and the hydrangea is the same. You can sort of see it almost asking for water. So take it out and submerge the whole head in just overnight, and it won't hurt if maybe you want to do this once or twice after the flower arrangement has been made. Now I obviously use hydrangeas a lot, so I can tell by the texture of it if it needs a good sort of dunk in water, and remove quite a lot of the foliage off the hydrangea as well, because it will help all the water go and keep that head lovely and hydrated. Now we have, this is Achillea. Some of you might grow this in the garden, and we've got this lovely vintage sort of pink tone. And this is a flower that will dry, so you can leave it in the arrangement, and as the week goes on, it'll naturally dry itself in the design. So a good one for when the weather is very hot like this. And again, it's not so important when we're placing it in floral foam, because we will get rid of a lot of the foliage anyway. But if you're picking them from the garden, if this is a great one for growing in the garden, then remove as much of the foliage after you've conditioned them in water, and it'll help the flower heads last that little bit longer. Let's just get rid of my rubbish. And then we have the Veronica, nice bright sort of purpley shade. Another one that will grow very well in a UK garden. One of my favourites, I absolutely love this. This is a Strantia major, again another one that will grow in the UK garden. Its common name is Million Stars, and that's because if you look at this lovely little hedge here in the centre, they look like tiny little stars all congregated there in the middle. So a Strantia. And then we have one of the big lime green blooms. This is called Anastasia, and this is one of the chrysanthemum family. Then another one of the chrysanthemum is this very sweet, very cute little button chrysanthemum. This is a Santini chrysanth, very small and very delicate. And I was toying whether I gave you roses this month, because we had a little bit of a problem with them last month, but I really couldn't resist this one. This is called Morosa, and again, lovely vintage shade, very, very popular in wedding work. Sort of almost a bi-coloured, sort of two-tone colour on that rose. Very, very attractive. And I think the ones I'm using are a little bit paler than the ones I've given you. The ones I've given you are more tighter. And unfortunately, in this very warm weather, roses are very much prone to what we call dampening off, and that's what happened last month. You get sort of brown leaves, brown petals, little brown spots appearing on the rose, and it's a little bit like what happens to us when we're very hot and sweaty. We tend to go in the shower and wash ourselves down. Well, the rose can't do that, so you get a lot of condensation and moisture builds up within that rose. I'm hoping it doesn't matter whether you buy a good quality rose, a cheap rose, a rose from different parts of the world. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen, and there's not a lot I can do about it. Let me just put my glasses on. Now, I do say this quite often. I love all the different tones of the flower petals, those outer petals. But if you do have anything that has a little bit of damage, it doesn't do the rose any harm just to remove them. But as I said, I like to keep it on because it gives you lots of different texture and lots of different colours. So that's all of the flowers explained. Let me just get rid of my glasses over there. And wipe my board down again, and we'll start putting the arrangement together. So let's just get a little bit tidy. Move my box here. Now I'm quite lucky, I've got a turntable, but it doesn't matter if you haven't got one at home. Now, I described at the beginning that it's a front-facing design, so we're going to be working on it so that it's looked at from one angle. It's not something that can be seen from all around. The focal of the flowers is going to be facing the front. So try and remember when you're working to keep your bow towards the front. And we're going to start with these three little palms, these three lovely Chico palms, if I can get them out. And it's a little bit difficult to do sometimes when you have a square base to start with, but we're going to try and put three placements of the foliage into a square container. Sometimes it plays a little bit of mind games. So get our nice sharp knife. And the Chico palms are just about the size of your box. If I hold that up alongside the box as an indication, that will give you roughly the length of the foliage that we need to work with. So just where the end of the little fronds finish, you need to give yourself about 1.5 inches, I would say, 3 or 4 centimetres. And if you think about where your bow is, if you think about directly at the back of the box as being 12 o'clock, that's where we're going to start. So a little bit of lesson in time as well. And so that's 12 o'clock. And if I turn that round, it's almost directly behind where your bow is. And it's upright a little bit. So if I turn it to the side, I'm not going too far flat down. I'm not coming right up high at that 90 degree sort of right angle. I'm coming somewhere in between, so that when you're looking at it from the front, you will still be able to see that lovely palm. And if we again think a little bit about a clock, if this is 12 o'clock, if we come roughly to 4 o'clock on the right hand side as you're looking at the box. So if you think about the clock, we're almost sort of 4 o'clock there, and then I'm going to come on the left hand side, cut it the same sort of length, maybe that's a little bit long, and we're going to come in on the opposite side, and that I would say is probably about 7 or 8 o'clock. And then what we end up with is 3 palms that are fairly equally spaced out. And it's a little bit like a triangle if you go point to point, an equal-sided triangle. So the aim is the gap in between each one is pretty much the same. So this is a little bit higher up at the back, and the 2 at the front are almost sitting down on the edges or the side of the box. And the front leaf on the right-hand side is in that bottom corner, and the opposite leaf again is in that opposite corner. And the fern at the back is almost in the dead sort of in the centre, and that then will create your shape for your little hat box, or in this case quite a large hat box. Then we're going to work with the eucalyptus, and this has a lovely arching shape. And if I just take out one of the palms, if I hold the palm up alongside that eucalyptus and cut it to the same sort of length, then that is a good guide for you to estimate how long your foliage needs to be. So we can pop that little Chico palm back in there. And then if you want to, you can cut several pieces of the eucalyptus. Now initially we're going to need 3. Doesn't matter if they're not perfectly aligned and they're not excuse me, they're not perfectly matching, as long as they're sort of roughly the similar size. And then we've started a little bit of a pattern, so we've done 3 palms, and then we can go in between each placement of the palm with the eucalyptus. So again, if we look at the eucalyptus, this front one is almost at a 6 o'clock position, and then we've sort of got 10 o'clock here and maybe 2 o'clock round here. So it's a little bit like a clock face as we go around. And what I didn't mention was with the eucalyptus, if I just cut one to show you, make sure that you've removed all that foliage off the bottom there before you insert it into the floral foam. And if you remember, it's better to cut everything at a little bit of an angle there, so it goes into the floral foam easier, and it also has more surface area open to take up the water. So straight away we've got that lovely shape forming around the little hat box. So then if we have a look at this pistache, this one is a little bit bunchier and more solid in its form. These materials here drape quite nicely over the side. So what we're going to do with this one is a little bit shorter this time. So probably if you use your scissors as a guide, it's probably about the length of your scissors. And then we're just going to dot this around, probably about 6 pieces. So give me a second and I'll turn that round for you to see where the positions that I've placed them into. They don't have to be identical in their size or shape. It's just really to use as a filler to fill in that outline shape. So if I turn that round, basically what I've done is I've put a little bit of this final foliage, this very full sort of foliage, in between each placement that we already had. So we had the palm and then the eucalyptus, and now I've added this little pistache in the middle. So we had the flat palm, the grey toned eucalyptus, and then this very lush pistache in between. And then we do the same. We have the palm and the eucalyptus and the green foliage in between. So basically we're just trying to cover some of this floral foam and creating a little bit of pattern with the foliage. And I think I've put 6 placements in of the final little piece. Now I'm hoping at this stage you've still got foliage left, because we'll use that to fill in at the end. But you should still be able to see that centre part of your floral foam. And the foliage so far is just sort of almost around the outside, a little bit like a skirt or a collar there around the outside. Now you can of course stop and pause the video as many times as you want. You can replay it if you don't understand anything that I've mentioned or anything I've talked about. And judging by the quality of the work everybody produced last week, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that the instructions were fairly clear, because you all seem to manage really well with your floral design. Now this lovely green chrysanthemum is going to come sort of pride of place almost to gauge my height of the design. I haven't quite decided how tall it's going to go yet, so let's see what we think. Yeah, so measure roughly the size size of your box. So it's a square box, so it doesn't matter if you do it crossways or lengthways. That's going to gauge roughly your height, and then you need to add in a good inch on the bottom of that, so you have some spare stem to go into the floral foam. It's not the end of the world if you cut it too short. And this is almost going in right smack bang in the sort of centre. You need to be careful because where the floral foam meets, you've obviously going to have a gap in between the middle. So step back slightly into the back section of the floral foam. So if I just show you that from the front, you'll see that I'm just in the back piece of the foam, but pretty much in the middle. And if I show you it from the side, it's almost straight up. So that's my sort of focal, my centre point. And if you think about the spokes of a wheel on a car, this would be your hubcap in the middle, and then all the material is radiating away from that sort of centre point. Now I've angled it slightly to one side, so we'd have a little bit of a wonky wheel, but it looks more natural if the materials are angled a little bit left or right, rather than it being very straight up there in the middle. Very different to last month where I wanted you to have them in very straight parallel lines. This one can be a little bit more quirky in its positioning. Now I'm going to go with the hydrangeas next. And as I explained to you earlier on, they are really thirsty flowers. They do cope well in floral foam, but if you allow the floral foam to dry out, then you will start to have problems because once it starts to dry out, it'll try and suck the water that's in the stems of the flower itself. So try your hardest to keep that floral foam nicely prepared and nicely soaked throughout the next week. It is really very warm. And as I said, if you feel it's sort of flopping a little bit, pull it out, upside down in a bit of water, and we'll all be sorted. Now we'll go roughly a little bit shorter than the box. So again, if you line it up alongside the box, and this one is going to sit quite nicely underneath my shamrock there, that lovely green chrysanthemum. So we've started to sort of step down. Remember, try and create your flowers on different heights. Creates a lot more interest and helps the eye travel through the design a lot better. And I am removing quite a lot of the foliage off the hydrangea just to help us keep them hydrated. I suppose if you roughly use your scissors as a guide, it's probably a little bit longer. Oh, having said that, you've all got different scissors, so that probably isn't a good tip. Maybe your hand. So if you use roughly your hand as a gauge, we're going to go a little bit longer than your hand. And this first bloom I put in is slightly angled to the right as you're making it. This one is going to sort of tuck in, angled the opposite sort of way. So remember, I quite often say we don't want them facing directly forward like a big pair of cat's eyes on the road or some headlights in a car. I've angled them slightly different angles, and I've put them at slightly different heights. So we've got one a little bit higher and one a bit lower. And because it's front facing, we haven't got one of the hydrangeas at the back. If I was doing this as an all-round design, I might possibly fill another hydrangea there at the back. But the white can be quite a dominant flower, so I didn't want to use three because it would be a little bit overpowering. And we of course have a lovely choice of other flowers as well to pop in there. So where are we up to next? Now then, we'll go, I think, with the two little chrysanthemums that I've provided for you. And one of them is going to come towards the front, so we've got this lovely colour at the front, and we're going to place one a little bit more towards the back. If you have any of the little button heads missing, sometimes they get a little bit damaged during transit, so I've just pulled those off. And it's going to go behind that chrysanthemum head. So if I just do that to show you how tall it's going to be, if you want to put your chrysanthemum head there down into, so it's sitting on top of the floral foam, that will give you a rough gauge of where you need to cut it. And that one, so I've already cut it. Now I'm used to doing this by eye, and sometimes I do the chopping a little bit too quickly. It's going to sit almost behind and to the left. Is that left or is that right? That's the left. To the left of that green chrysanthemum there. And this is what causes depth. It brings your eye back towards the back. And even though it's at the back of the design, and I've explained to you that this is front facing, you can still see the colour balance and the colour contrast really nicely through the design. And then that front one is going to sit in between those two those two hydrangea heads. So I'm going to cut this. I'm going to use it at the full length because I have lots of little heads. Now, sometimes when we're working with chrysanthemums, we do take off the individual heads and use them on their own. But these are a little bit small. This is what we call the breaks, and the breaks in this one are a little bit small. So this little flower is going to come, it's going to be a little bit too long, so we'll take it a little bit shorter, and he's going to pop really nicely there in between those two full hydrangea heads. So we've got a lovely distribution of colour. And then I'm going to go with the Astrantia. So this is the one that I call the Million Stars. And there should be 3 stems. Yes, there are 3 lovely little stems. And because this is a smaller flower and a little bit more dainty, and that's a good example of one. It is when it's taking up the water, because that's really, it's not flopping because it hasn't had water. It does have this nice cascading shape, so that will suit hanging over the side of the design quite nicely. So we're looking now to bring them so that this almost sort of sitting on top of that palm. Now if I show you this one, you can see that the palm on this side is really quite dominant. It's saying, oh, hello, look at me, I'm a big palm. But by placing that Astrantia on top of it, it makes it blend in much better. Now I've managed to get 2 pieces from that Astrantia, so there's nothing wrong with you using the bottom section. You can even, if it's long enough, cut it into 3. Now I say this quite often in workshops, flowers don't grow the same. Their length or size of the stem will vary, so I can't, you haven't all got identical size and shapes flowers. So sometimes you might get 2 out of it, sometimes you might get 3. And what I'm doing with these, so that's a good place to cut that in to 2 sections, and then I can cut this one again so that I have 3 pieces out of 1 stem. And I'm going to bring, now we don't have to do it perfectly symmetrical. This is quite a quirky sort of, not a very traditional design where we have things matching on either side. So what I'm going to do with the little Astrantia is I'm just going to dot it out. That's probably going to be too long. Most of the flowers are the same sort of length as the palms that we put in at the very beginning, and I'm possibly going to get 6 pieces from my 3 original stems, and I'm just dotting them out and around so that we've got a lovely little bit of this colour and texture throughout. And we need to insert the flowers about a good sort of inch into the floral foam, nothing bigger, otherwise you'll find that the stems will hit one another and cross in the centre, but they have to be deep enough so that they'll take up the water and they're nice and secure and they don't fall off. So how's that coming together so far? So you'll see I've just dotted out the Astrantia in various different places just to cover a few little gaps. And now I'm going to go with the rose, because the rose is a nice large flower and it's going to fill quite a big gap. Oh, look at that. Isn't that lovely? If I just turn that around now for you to see how that colour combination is coming together. It's very dreamy, almost like a sort of raspberry ripple that you would get down at the ice cream parlour. Okay, so I'm going to bring one of these in at the front, and again I think if you sort of consider your hand span, that's roughly about the length I would cut the rose, not including the head of the flower. If you're a little bit worried, always cut it longer. You can always cut it shorter. If you cut it too long, we obviously can't stick a bit of leaf on, or a bit of stem on I should say. So what we need to do now is to bring that colour of the rose here towards the back, so that we've got it quite evenly spaced out. And depending really on how big your hydrangeas are, you might find that your placement is going to be slightly different to mine. So again, if we use that sort of hand span as an idea, this one can fit beautifully behind that hydrangea. And because we're working in threes this time, this sort of gap here needs to be replicated over this side. So if you think about maybe having a rose in this sort of area here to bring that colour over onto the left hand side. So again, think about your hand span, and then I'm going to just sort of manipulate around that little hydrangea head a little bit, so we get that in a place where that colour is nicely distributed throughout the design. Now if you wanted to do this design again at a later date and you don't have the same flower content as I've provided with you today, you just really need to think about fairly evenly spreading out the colours and the flower choices that you've got. And if you've only got, we're working in sort of quantities of 3 today. If you aren't able to get quantities of 3, it doesn't matter, just work with whatever you can get from the garden or from your local shop. Now we're going to go with the Achillea, quite a traditional sort of cottage garden flower, and for me I can see that I've got a gap over here, so I can see where my first placement is going to go. And whereas last month we did a parallel design and there were definite sort of rules to follow, this one is a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more natural, and the pattern to follow isn't quite as cut and dried as it was while you're as you were doing last month. It's a little bit more relaxed, and you've got the opportunity to be a little bit more creative with what you're doing. So the Achillea that I had was quite a large stem, and that's been cut down into 3, so a little bit like I did with the Hydrangeas at the beginning. And if you haven't got one large piece like I just showed you, you might have several small pieces, and you do exactly the same with them. Just cut them so you've got that roughly that hand span, and dot out the colours and the textures throughout the design. So I've already placed some of the Achillea on this side, so I now need to bring a little bit of it down here and possibly some here at the back. And if you've got more flowers left over, you know, I'm encouraging you at the moment to work in sort of groups of 3. You'll probably find that you've got more flowers to do more than just 3 groups. So just keep going, adding them in, trying to think about placing different textures alongside one another. So we've got the rose there, which is a lot smoother in its texture, alongside the almost sort of pom-pom style of this chrysanthemum, and then the Achillea here is what we would describe as almost a pincushion, very small and fussy. So we're trying to think of the textures and the colours alongside one another. So I have another little bit of Hydrangeas, so I'm just going to pop that in wherever I feel there's a little gap. And you'll see that everything is on different levels, so we're not trying to get everything very straight and very perfect. We want everything to have lots of up and down movement in the design. And I've got a little sort of stray Astrantia here, which I'll pop in towards the back. And isn't that lovely so far? Isn't that coming along really well? So the colour choice was chosen to try and link with the base. That's another important factor when you're learning flower arranging or floristry. Always try and link together the colour in your design with your base. If you're photographing this at home, you'll find that these two big hydrangeas in the middle here will be very much dominant in the photograph, because white is what we call a dominant flower. It's the colour that's picked up by the light the most, and that's another reason why I didn't give you 3 of them, because they stand out very much within a design. So we now have these Veronica, a purple sort of Veronica, and the leaf of the Veronica doesn't really cope very well in this heat, so I'm going to remove all of those. And again, I'm thinking of that sort of hand span from underneath the bottom of that flower head. Cut it at an angle, make sure I've removed all of the floral foam, make sure I've removed all of the foliage from underneath, and I'm almost going to go back to that original placement, so that's pretty much at 12 o'clock. And I'm going to bring one sort of towards the front right, almost following where I put those palms in the very beginning. And this darker sort of tone of the Veronica is going to pick up really nicely on the purple of the bow at the front. And I'm just going to pop that one again so that we've got a nice even distribution of colour. So everything, if we look at everything, we've got sort of these what we call triangles of plant material. So you can see a triangle from this flower across, a triangle with the roses, and we've got one here with the little Achillea flower. And that's pretty much all your flowers added. You might have extra little bits and pieces left over, so just keep on going, adding them at the sides or the centre, wherever you feel that you have a gap. And what I'm going to do with the bits that I've got left over, so I've got some of the pistache and some of this lovely eucalyptus. I'm just going to go around and fill in any little gaps that I might have. Add a little bit of texture, a little bit of contrast in colour. Now, with the floral foam, if you're looking at what is technically the back of the design, so it's this sort of section down here, if you can see any obvious foam, use the spare bits of foliage just to hide that little bit of foam. Makes the design much neater. It's making sure that all your what we call mechanics are hidden, so it's all the materials that aren't attractive, all the bits that we need to hide. And it also stops the floral foam from losing water. It stops the water evaporating out of the foam and will help your flowers last that little bit longer. And when you get to this sort of stage, quite often it's obvious where you need to put some plant material in and some flowers in. Now, if we look a little bit at this palm on the outside, it's standing out a little bit. It's a little bit obvious that there's a big palm sitting out the side. So I'm going to use a little bit of one of the foliage types just to tuck in with that palm, so it blends in a little bit more and it's not quite so obvious there. And just spend a little bit of time moving it around to see if you feel that you need any little bits of foliage just to tuck in and hide any gaps. And I think that's a really nice job. I think that's a lovely summer design, beautiful colour combination, real true summer colours. and hopefully you've ended up with a fantastic design just like this as well. So remember, keep that floral foam hydrated, just very slowly pour some water in there to keep the foam wet and to stop it drying out. If you think your hydrangeas are suffering, pull them out, submerge them in a little bit of water overnight, and hopefully you'll have a lovely arrangement to enjoy over the next week or 10 days. I think it's wonderful. Now next month is September, and we're starting to move a little bit into the autumn flower arranging, and we're hoping that in September we'll be back here with the workshops back running at the studio. But we've decided that we're only going to do 4 visitors at a time, so 4 arrangers is will work quite easily here, allowing you to have the 2 metre space apart. So hopefully we will see you in September, and I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you very much again for booking and taking part in another workshop, and don't forget to send me your photos of your fantastic floral designs. See you all again very soon.